Now the American armed forces can act as police, and they can detain American civilians who are arrested on American soil indefinitely without charge and without trial. This is huge. It means that Barack Obama has just wiped his ass with the Constitution.
Hmm.
And it's now shit stained. No good. It goes in the
Well,
garbage after that.
and you know, it makes me want to say one more thing, just relating this to Canada. I think that as Canadians, we are so influenced, and so much more impacted by America and American news, that we forget that even in Stephen Harper's Canada, that there are still larger differences between the political parties here than there are amongst the political parties in the United States.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
people respond to an American situation in Canada, and it just doesn't. To say that the parties here are the same is just not true.
Do you think
And
that Jean Chrétien or Paul Martin would be building nuclear submarines, buying fighter jets, building jails, um, and doing anything like that, bombing Libya? Do you think Jean Chrétien would do that? And also unqualified support for Israel and rattling sabers right behind the Americans with Iran. Do you know what I
exactly.
mean? Like, shit. The Americans are now a police state, and they're getting set for war with Iran. And I hope with all of my being that that war does not happen. There's been enough killing and mutilation and starvation and stuff like that
Mhm.
associated with war in the last 10 years. Can we just stop? We're bankrupt. No one can afford to pay for this war. We can't afford it. The Americans can't afford it. Iran can't afford it. China can't afford it.
Our
Nobody
grandchildren
can.
can't afford it.
Right, exactly, because that's who's going to really be paying for it. I mean, it's time to stop, you know? Guess what? You know who lives in Iran?
People,
People. Just like people.
human
Right.
beings.
People live in America, and America has an evil right wing religious fundamentalist government. Oh, guess what? Um, People live in Iran, and they have a religious fundamentalist government as well.
Yeah.
Us people live in Canada. We have a right wing fundamentalist nut as a leader too. Okay? So here's the thing. When us people get outsmarted by our leaders and support a war effort that is just meant to make some people dead and some other people rich, we're being outsmarted and we're doing wrong. War is
Hmm.
never right. There has never been a war that was right.
Never
This
been a
this
war that
this
was fought for justice. Never been a war that was fought for humanity. Never been a humanitarian. Like to say that any war can have a humanitarian component. The only thing I can say is go and search down some people who have experienced living through warfare and talk to them about the humanitarian aspects of war.
Yeah, I put
You
up on
know,
my Facebook wall a little while ago, and this is why I mean, I put up on my Facebook wall, and I mean, I can count my friends I lose as I do this shit. It's funny, you know what I mean? I put up a video of Libyan children in a hospital. There was this one kid whose lower jaw was blown off, so all you saw was like blood gushing down his neck and his top teeth, but nothing underneath it, and he was screaming and gurgling, making the most satanic noises that could ever imagine. And then there was another kid laying on the same gurney right beside him with his ankle blown off. You know what I mean? He was in shock. He was in shock because of his injury, but looking at in horror at the other kid laying on the same. And the doctors were trying, man, but they're, oh god. Anyway, people weren't too impressed. But here's the thing: look at it, because when you support a war, everybody I know supported the Libyan war. I don't know. I think you're the only one, and a few other friends that I know that didn't support it. The NDP voted unanimously for it. You know what I mean?
in
Um,
the end, when it was too late, they finally woke up and realized what they had voted for.
Too late. Too
But
late.
yeah, that's done.
Too late.
By the time they said that they wanted to have their component pulled out of NATO, it was already done.
Yeah.
They'd,
It's like
NATO had
if you
already
commit mass.
bombed
Yeah.
Gaddafi's convoy, and then the NATO rebels on the ground had already sodomized him with a knife and murdered him in cold blood.
Yeah, it's too
So
late after that. Once you commit mass murder or you're a party to mass murder, an apology doesn't really do. You still go to jail. It's good. It's
exactly.
good that you apologize, but you still have to pay a price for that. And I mean, insofar as if the NDP voted for that to prevent Stephen Harper from having a wedge issue, which is something I'm always very sensitive to. Okay, but this is not the right time to. If there's ever going to be a time to act on principle, it's when murder is involved. You know what I mean? I understand that you might want to go along and let this one slide because the media, even the CBC, was unqualified in their support for this war. Absolutely unqualified. I did not hear any voice of dissent on the CBC, which absolutely enraged and disgusted me. You know what I mean? Because I want the CBC to be a balanced viewpoint. You know, and it was not. Just because they didn't have what we consider to be democracy, I consider their society to be far more democratic than ours is. But just because they didn't have something that lines up with what we consider to be democracy, and that Gaddafi is a crazy fucking dictator or whatever, does not mean that
he was obviously a demagogue, and it's not to say that the guy is completely defensible. That was never my position.
Not at all. But you know what? Why didn't the CBC pick up the New York Times story that right after the NTC finally deposed Gaddafi to show the Al Qaeda flag flying over the NTC headquarters?
Exactly.
The New York Times carried that story.
And sadly, though, the only thing I can say about that is that tends to just confuse people, anyways, because they don't really see that there's a deeper political level that goes on in these wars. They've been given the consumable level of humanitarian efforts and no-fly zones, and they don't realize that a country like United States and its NATO allies can just as easily ally themselves with the same forces that they at other times oppose, if it meets their goals.
Absolutely.
And this is exactly what is happening in the Middle East right now. It seems like the West is willing to use its radical Sunni Muslim contacts that are the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda to push back different Shia Islamic governments and states, namely now Syria and Iran.
I know. So what it boils down to is this. And tie it back in what we were talking about a little while ago. People should vote, and they shouldn't just vote. They should also stay informed.
Exactly.
Have a viewpoint that is carefully constructed using information and facts and integrity in your personal character, and then get after your politicians and tell them what you think. Contact your MP and say that
person, and then oppose, a vast majority of what they stand for.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's
just
nothing
because
wrong
you
with
vote
that.
for someone doesn't mean that you have to have blind loyalty and faith in that person afterwards. If I've got one of my 2012 election fallout resolutions is to not put faith in parties or politicians, because a politician is at a certain level, no matter how good this person is, self-interested. Okay? Playing politics to get reelected. A lot of these politicians think this is a great job. You can have a politician who might have been struggling their whole life financially, but had political credentials and social credentials in their community, and parlayed their bullshit career into a $150,000 a year career with the sweetest pension plan ever. You know what I mean? You could be standing on the street busking with your acoustic guitar, singing about miners and shit like that one day, and be making $500 a day the next day. You know what I mean?
Right.
What this means is, at the end of the day, politicians are politicians. Parties are an organization of politicians to advance their collective self-interest. Okay, and that's why the party isn't something you get behind and you be blindly loyal to. It's something that you have to bend to your will insofar as you can.
Exactly.
You know
so,
what I mean?
in other words, to be willfully ignorant and avoid politics that are going to exist, whether you support them or not, is no way to influence them.
Right.
You have to hold them to account, and the only way to do that is to engage them.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
if you don't, and that includes, in my book, both voting and through activism.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that you can really expect to have a better influence in politics. I mean, we could all quit voting because we could say that they're all the same. And then for the next 50 years, we'll have continual conservative governments that'll just keep turning Canada more into something closer to the United States. And we can keep complaining about it and not vote. But why? I just don't understand. There are differences between the parties. I mean, there are similarities, of course.
Yeah.
You'll find similarities between the Liberals and the
Yeah.
Conservatives, or the Liberals and the NDP, but that doesn't mean that they're all the same.
Yeah, and it's,
So-
I mean, for what we have to have in the future, and we'll get to this near the end of our show again, but here's the deal. The Liberals and the NDP need to cooperate, okay? You cannot have the NDP telling the world that the Liberals are exactly equal to the Conservatives, because it's insulting to our intelligence. We know that's not the case.
Mhm.
We didn't see Jean Chrétien go into war at all. He sent a peacekeeping mission to Afghanistan. People forget that. It was a peacekeeping mission. No rules of combat. Their rules of engagement were not that of a combat mission. And as
Right.
soon as the first thing Stephen Harper did was he turned that into a combat mission. Okay?
Mhm.
And then Canadians started dying. Right? And Afghanis. You know what? More importantly, Afghanistanis started dying.
Like Canadians.
Because we have no, you know what? They're defending their country. We have no business over there killing them. We had no business at all. Okay,
Well, this goes
the
to-
9/11 bombers were from Saudi Arabia, financed through Pakistan. Okay, so shut the fuck up. We didn't have any reason to be in Afghanistan. None,
Exactly.
except if you wanted to protect the opium trade. Then that's a good reason.